We'll call the first millage rate meeting, public hearing, I should say, to order. This is a required public hearing required by the state of Georgia. And notice of this public hearing was given to the legal organ for today. And so we will entertain questions here shortly from our public. And if you are online, we appreciate you being online this morning. I know that sometimes we, in the last few years, have had more people online than we sometimes have present, but we appreciate that and the input that you have. Carrie's back in the back monitoring any kind of online traffic, so if we get a question even from there, we could accommodate that through her if you'd like to. So notice there was a notice of a press release that was required by the state of Georgia online, or I'm sorry, placed in the paper, and it says the Dade County Board of Commissioners today announces its intention to increase the 2026 property taxes it will levy this year by 3.06% in the unincorporated area and 2.3% in the incorporated area over the rollback millage rate. And so we'll talk a little bit about that here shortly, about what is the millage rate and why we have to, when we're leaving the millage rate the same, why does the state require us to advertise a tax increase? And so if we have a handout, or well, it's not a handout, we have online for your availability, a millage rate, it's called Millage Rate Simplified Property Taxes 2026. And the state of Georgia requires all local governments, county, city, school board, including other taxing authorities such as industrial development authorities in the state, to adopt a millage rate to pay for budgeted expenses, road maintenance, paying teacher salaries, provide ambulance service, maintaining fire trucks, and other emergency services. Emergency 911, sheriff's office, court system, etc. That's any kind of service you're afforded through the county government and actually the school board, including the public education of our students in Dade County, primarily is made up of property tax. Property tax is the only thing counties, cities, and local governments, such as school boards, can really count on. We can estimate that we'll receive so many fees or grants, but in reality, we can only count on one thing, and that's property tax. Even sales tax is fluid and can be variable from the standpoint of if we're in a recession and people aren't shopping, then we may not collect it. So there is that. What is a millage rate? Millage rate is simply defined. It's a term of taxation. It means a meal is a rate expressed in meals per dollar, and means 1,000th part. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Is a rate as of taxation? Let me back up. A millage rate is the tax rate used to calculate local property taxes. The millage rate represents the amount of every $1,000 of a property assessed. If you want to put that on the screens, if you've got it, you can, Caleb. Assigned millage rates are multiplied by the total taxable value of the property in order to arrive at a property tax. The rate represents the amount a homeowner has to pay every year for every 1,000 of a property's assessed value. And so basically 1 mil equals 1/10, or well, it's 1/10 of 1%. And so you see that on our chart right now. Can they see that online at home? Is that how that works? Okay.
It's on YouTube.
Okay.
It's a video and they can listen to it.
Okay. What is a millage rate? $1,000 in property value equals $1. So just trying to let everyone know, we use terms like mill and stuff, and if you're not used to hearing those, we want everybody to understand what we're talking about. How do we determine a mill? In the state of Georgia, we use two different values to help determine a mill. We use the assessed value versus market value. Market value is the current estimated amount that property can be bought or sold. And so every year, the state of Georgia, we have to report to them and they report on us. It's called a sales ratio report. And so they compare market value to assessed value. And in fact, Paula Duvall, our chief appraiser, just came at our last meeting here a couple of weeks ago, I guess it was last Thursday, wasn't it? And gave a report on exactly that, the sales ratio report. And we take a look at that and compare the values, trying to get as close to that 40% mark as we can. Assessed value is 40% of the market value and is used as the basis for calculating the property tax levy. So the next couple of screens there are basically the same information, just looking at it a little bit different. And for an example of that is if the market value of a parcel of real property in Dade County is $150,000, then its corresponding assessed value, which means that 40% of that is $60,000. And so that's the way to look at that. And then from that, there is, if you have a homestead exemption, we don't have that listed on here, but you typically take off another $2,000 off of that value before the millage rate is applied. This year, the legislature approved what's called a homeowner's tax relief grant, and for $16,000 additional dollars. So that if you have a homestead, you'll actually get an $18,000 decrease on from your 40% assessed value, and then the millage rate is applied to that value. The next screen is property tax calculations, and basically, if you look at that, it says take tax for a single parcel. Again, a market value of $150,000 means the assessed value is $60,000, or 40% of the market value. And currently, our millage rate was reduced last year from 7.75 to 7.5. This year, we are recommending it remain at 7.5, and that 7.5 assessed at a $60,000 assessed value would mean $450 is taxable, and so that's what that means. 7.5 mils is $450. Now, if you have an exemption on that, those exemptions come off of that $60,000 before the millage rate's applied. You may be a veteran, you may have, you're over a certain age, I think in Georgia 67 or 70, I think for county. You qualify for exemptions. You do have to apply for those exemptions through the Board of Assessors office each year, but that is something that we would recommend that you check into. So, looking at the next page, how is the millage rate determined? Each local authority or government comes to each other, meets, and then they determine what does the county services look like, what does the city services look like, and what is the school board's budget comprised of. We take that information and then we create a budget. Typically, in our case, budgets are done here, I believe, July 1 through June 30. I'm not sure if the city is on that same one or if they're on calendar year, I can't recall. And the school board, I think, is on a fiscal calendar of July 1 through June 30. So we take that. Each of the governing authorities consider the amount of money they need to raise funds to fund the budget through property tax revenue, considers the property tax value of the overall digest, and that's called consolidation sheets, and in the county and determines the rate at which they must tax that real value or millage rate. And then every governing authority decides their own millage rate. So the city will determine theirs, the school board will determine their millage rate, and then the county, that's what we've done here, doing this in this part of this process is determining the millage rate. And then from all three of those, you then can declare what the total mill rate is in Dade County. It says, so how do property taxes in Dade County compare to other counties? Well, right now, Dade County is ranked 8th in the top 10 places in the state of Georgia receiving most value for their property taxes in 2025. Now, that's according to smartasset.com. That's smart, SMARTASSET.com. And so if you're interested, you can go out and take a look at that and compare Dade County to other counties. We are currently looking at FLOST, by the way. The FLOST is floating local option sales tax. And as far as millage rates go, if it were passed today and in effect, we would be the second lowest in the state of Georgia, which is honestly a great thing to celebrate. I mean, you know, so I mean, it is efficiency. We do all the public hearings. We have to have 3 public hearings. One was today at 11 a.m., one is at 6 p.m. tonight, one will be next Thursday, August 20th at 4 p.m., and then we'll hold a special call meeting at 4:30 to consider approval for the proposed 2026 millage rate at that time. And then I think the following week we'll have a meeting after the school board holds their 3rd public hearing. We will have the following we'll have a meeting there to approve the collection of the school board's millage rate, and because they utilize the property tax commissioner's office to do that, and so it's required by Georgia governing authority to do that. Rollback of a millage rate to offset inflationary increases. Well, what that's talking about is when the total digest of taxable property is prepared, Georgia law requires that a rollback millage rate must be computed. And so that is why we have had to advertise a tax increase. Georgia says, look, you may be at 7.5 mills, but if you were to roll property taxes back so that you collect in tax revenue exactly what you collected last year, it provides what's called a rollback rate. And so even if the millage rate remains the same or even slightly lowered, it still may result in additional property taxes. We do consider that growth, and when we say there's growth in the digest, that's talking about stuff like new homes that have been built. Commissioner Hartline reports each month on the different electrical permits, and we are fortunate. We're not the fastest growing by any means in Georgia, but we always seem to experience some growth. Sometimes, you know, Evan Stone, our economic development director, may come and say, we have a new business. Well, those businesses ultimately are taxed through property taxation. And so when we have that, those facilities and their equipment can be taxed, and that they use inside those manufacturers. And so we know next year, one of our largest corporations in Dade County, which is Vanguard, they will begin paying taxes. And so that's not this year, but that is next year. And so that's what the growth is. We have quite a bit of growth. If you make enhancements to your home, or if you were to build a barn in the backyard or whatever you may do, then those, you know, once the tax assessors come through, you are taxed on those structures. And so anyway, now we're going to look at the actual calculations. This year's calculation is we are collecting in the unincorporated area, which is basically the land that sits outside the city limits. 1 mill will produce $595,957. In the incorporated area, it's $123,066. So 1 mill in Dade County is worth $719,023. That's 1 mill. That net worth, if you look at it there, was actually $719,023,896. But we look at it in the form of a mill. So 1 mill does equal right at almost $720,000. This year we did collect an insurance premium tax, $1,378,213, and in local option sales tax we collected $3,075,828. The reason I bring those two things up is because they're called rollbacks. And when you're calculating your millage rate, those two values, we roll our property tax back 100% of whatever that value is. And so those monies come straight off of the tax. And therefore, we don't collect it a second time. It helps reduce property tax. The 5-year history was placed in the newspaper, and actually it's 6, I see 6 years on there, but that's good. That's 5. So we've got a 5-year, technically it's got 6 years, but 5 years of information there for you to consider. And from 2021 all the way through 2026. If you look on the left side of that, it's blue. It says unincorporated area at the top, and incorporated area at the bottom. And then the very bottom has a collection of both the unincorporated and the incorporated for the total county value. This is just a different way to look at it. The real and personal property this year was worth $834,098,000, and the motor vehicles was $4,601,000. Mobile homes were $7.6 million. Timber was at $245,000. And so the gross digest in the unincorporated area was $846,549. And so less exemptions is 250. So what is exemptions? Exemptions are, again, those things afforded by state law and or local legislation, one of which is not on this particular one, but for like the school board, if you're 65 or older and have 5 acres, you can exempt that from property tax. Now, this is counties. There is a school board version of this in the newspaper this week or last week that you can review, and that would include the exemption value, and it would probably be much higher because the school board collects now about 3/4 of property taxes compared to our 1/4 of property tax on your tax bill. 7.5, like I said, last year was 7.5. We're keeping the millage rate at 7.5. You see the total gross operating millage rate is 14.0904%. You take less the rollbacks, 6.59, and of that is the local option sales tax and the insurance premium tax. So those two combined reduced our millage rate by almost 6.6 mils, bringing it to 7.5. And then at the bottom, you see the incorporated values is the same information, just a little bit less, $164,737,862 of real and personal property. Motor vehicles, $597,000. Mobile homes, $136,000. And typically, you don't see much timber cut inside the city. It's possible, but you don't usually see much of that. And so their total gross digest was $165,470,000, and then the less exemptions there was $42,404, and leaving a net digest of $1,066,442. Again, that equates that 1 mil equaling $123,000. So. At the very bottom, the digest, there is that number that we talked about a minute ago. Total digest value is $719,023,896. And then, so the net levy, the net millage maintenance and operation of taxes levied is $5,677,283. And so that is a net increase of $318,517 over last year's budget. That's a 5.94% net tax percentage increase over the prior year. The next form we've got in here is the unincorporated area and the incorporated area. It's called PT 32.1. It comes from the Department of Revenue. And this is how we calculate the rollback rate. So Georgia says, even though your millage rate is 7.5, if you were to collect the exact same amount you did last year, that millage rate would have only been 7.277. And so that is a 3% increase, 3.06% increase over the rollback rate. The confusing thing in Georgia is typically, you know, we never calculate our taxes in a year. For instance, 2025 to 2026, we never fall to the rollback rate as far as a calculation goes. It is available, but we don't do that. That's not, that's not how counties typically operate. And so, but you have to advertise it that way. And so it does get quite confusing to a lot of people thinking, wow, you're raising my taxes. But in essence, the millage rate's staying the same. If you have a frozen value, you won't see a tax increase. I mean, if you have a frozen value. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, then what I would suggest, again, is contact the Board of Assessors office, and you can, annually, you have an opportunity to freeze your value, and I would highly suggest you do that. So if you freeze it this year and it's at $100,000, but in 10 years it's worth $1 million, you're still paying taxes on that $100,000, not the million, not the market price, but the assessed value of that frozen value. So that is something to consider. It's not, you don't have to do it, but I would probably highly suggest you do it. And then at the back for the commissioners, you see the different versions of increase. It's called a millage rate step increase. And those are just some values. If you had a $100,000 or a $300,000 home, what the actual difference would be. For instance, in the unincorporated rate, if you had no homestead exemption, and you would pay $8.92 more on a $100,000 home than you did in 2025. And so, and then there's the unincorporated rollback rate for $300,000, and then also the incorporated values are behind that. So, we will now open it up to any questions from the audience. And we have no questions. All right. Does the commissioners have any comments or questions? Does the staff have any questions or comments? Everybody's quiet today. All right.
We have another meeting tonight at 6, though.
We do have another meeting at 6 this evening. And again, we'll have one next Thursday as well at 4 p.m. Those times are not, we have a little flexibility, but they're chosen by the state. We have to have one before noon, we have to have one at 6 or later, and then we have to have one in between. So just in case you're wondering how we chose those times, that's how we do that to comply with state law. All right, hearing no other comments, the public hearing is hereby adjourned.